On March 17, 1965, the Soviet Union attempts yet another crewed launch of their N-1 moon rocket, following 2 successful flights known to the public. Unlike previous flights, this particular mission is broadcast live by Soviet media to the entire world, unable to hide the fateful consequences of a failed mission this time around. 2 Soviet cosmonauts lose their lives this dreadful day, in the name of exploration, for the cause of their people, and for all Kerbalkind. When the dust settles, however, an undeniable side effect of this tragedy resides at the forefront of the American people's minds. What this setback really means, the opportunity it provides. We once again have a shot at being first to the moon.
Stand by for the count. 15, 14, 13, 12, 11, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, ignition. 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. Liftoff. Clock, north flight. Roger, clock. Clear the time. Roll completed. Roger, roll. Mark, hold 1 Bravo. Roger, 1 Bravo. Stand by for staging. Status check. Booster. Go. Final. Go. Guidance. Go. Capcom, we're go for staging. You are go for staging. Mark, mode 1 and Charlie. You are mode 1 Charlie. Inboard out. Roger, inboard. Outboard out. Head to ignition. PU activate. Thrusters go. Okay, PU and thrust. And your thrust looks good. Confirm station. We're go for tower jet. You are go for tower jet. Okay, short status check all positions. Booster, go. Retro. Final. Go, flight. Guidance. Go with convergence. Good. Roger. GNC. Go. Ecom. Go. Surgeon. Go. Capcom, we're go. You are go all the way. Everything looks good. Roger.
April 23rd, 1965. 11 a.m., the Trinity 1 mission lifts off from Brownsville, Texas, carrying a crew of 3 aboard the first crewed flight of the Saturn V launch vehicle. The culmination of the entire space program's efforts displayed with a might and ferocity rumbling through the otherwise calm morning atmosphere below. Up through the clouds, the rocket soars, gathering speed and altitude as it makes its way towards Earth orbit. And K4B shut down right on time. The crew of Trinity 1 have reached a stable 260-kilometer orbit of the Earth. The roster for the first crewed Saturn V flight is made up of 2 rookies, commanded by Gus Kerman, the first to step foot, so to speak, aboard the K4 research station for a months-long stay early last year. Along with him, Command Module Pilot Jim Kerman and Lunar Module Pilot Scott Kerman. These mission roles exist in addition to Jim's role of pilot, Gus's role of engineer, and Scott's role of scientist. The objective of their mission is an all-systems checkout of the 2 vehicles in Earth orbit, as well as mission profile verification. Everything about the lunar landing mission looks good on paper, but it's not until we fly the vehicles up and get our hands dirty that we really, truly know for sure what to expect. The crew intends to find and solve any possible problems future missions may encounter, and to blaze a trail ahead into the heavens. This begins, of course, with the Command and Service Module. For one orbit, life support systems are monitored and checklists are run through. Come sunrise and acquisition of signal by ground teams on the western coast of the United States, Jim Kerman will actuate the switches to unfurl the K4B's panels and separate from the rocket stage. Small pulses of its quad thrusters allow the craft to now maneuver freely, and the now open petals of the rocket stage beneath them reveal for the very first time a vehicle designed specifically for landing on the moon, the Lunar Excursion Module. Coming into view, the LEM fills the small windows Jim and Scott are able to peer through. Jim on the left side, pulsing the RCS jets to maintain orientation as they inch closer and closer, and Scott on the right side, filming every second with a handheld film camera. Coming in, the docking probe mechanism makes contact with the drogue on the lunar lander, softly latching into place. The probe is then commanded to retract with the flip of a switch, and the two spacecraft have become one, pulled together, with mechanisms utilized during the Dyna K4 mission, once again proving their worth. Transposition and docking now complete. The crew pass over Cuba, just south of ground stations located in southern Florida. Next, they will separate once again from the K4B stage, this time pulling free the lunar module currently nesting within. Nearly 2 hours from liftoff in Texas, the command is given for separation, and an unexpected problem seems to arise immediately. Not on the Trinity spacecraft or the LEM, but on the K4B. The K4B controls its orientation, or attitude, via two side-mounted thruster packs designated the Auxiliary Propulsion System, or APS. Though not indicating any problems prior to separation whatsoever, now control ceases to respond altogether, rendering the stage uncontrollable. Not a big problem in and of itself, if it weren't for a slight nudge given to it by one of the LEM's landing gear. Trinity 1 slowly backs away as flight control below narrows their troubleshooting on the K4B's APS. In a matter of minutes, a solution is found by rerouting pitch and yaw actuation settings, and control of the rocket stage is restored not even half a rotation later. Instructed to now hold a retrograde attitude and verifying spatial separation of it and the Trinity spacecraft now floating free, Scott has something extraordinary to film next. The next task of today's flight is a crew observation of the K4B relighting its J2 engine. APS ullage is observed, and the rocket lights its engine to perform a retrograde maneuver. Flight would very much like any and all rather large obstacles, such as massive fuel tanks, removed from the immediate area. And so, having completed its job, Trinity 1's K4B descends into the atmosphere and rapidly dissolves in bright flashes of plasma. Back in orbit, Trinity pressurizes the lunar module before opening the hatch connecting the two vehicles. Gus and Scott are finally able to enter and begin firing up systems via a long checkout checklist, similar to that performed for the command module by backup crews before prime crew ingress on the ground. Although this time without any of that pesky gravity keeping them tied down. Long story short, the lunar module is fully activated and fully ready to fly all on its own. In the command service module, a single switch is actuated, the docking probe extends, and the lander is pushed free. Life support systems are active and in good condition. Reaction control fuel is heated and RCS appears in working order. The crew, despite discussion from NASA, have been allowed by Foundation members to nickname their two vehicles. The command module will be unofficially designated Linus, and the lunar module, Lucy, as references to Peanuts and Charlie Brown, an inspiration that the crew of Trinity 2 will also share during their next flight. But for now, the two say goodbye as Lucy maneuvers safely away to conduct its mission profile. This being a separation of the two spacecraft in orbit, followed by a reunion several orbits later, conducting in-orbit rendezvous and docking as the crew of Trinity 3 are set to perform after rising from the lunar surface on their daring landing mission. Gus and Scott pressurize the descent stage fuel tanks, arm the master switch, and light the descent engine. The burn will be at 10% thrust for 5 seconds, followed by 100% thrust for 5 additional seconds, ensuring that its mechanisms are operating as they should. As displayed by the Surveyor program, deep throttleable engines are ideal for landing on the moon and essential for crewed landings. During a landing, of course, the burn will last far longer than 10 seconds. However, any longer and safety margins for this particular mission would be breached. In the case of an engine malfunction on either of the two vehicles, we do not want to end up in a situation where the lunar module becomes hopelessly stranded. This is the first time crew have piloted a spacecraft in orbit that is entirely incapable of returning them to the Earth. So, returning to the command module is absolutely paramount. All in all, this 10-second burn should be long enough to gather useful data, but small enough to ensure RCS thrusters should be able to perform an emergency rendezvous should worst come to worst. For the next few orbits, Lucy will drift alone in the vacuum of space, traveling further and further away from the single spacecraft able to bring them home safely. Life support systems of the lander will serve to keep the crew alive for 1.5 days' time. Not much of a concern at the present time, but does make for an uncomfortable margin for an actual landing on the moon. Although this may very likely lead to an additional descent stage battery being installed later on, meant to extend the lifetime of said lunar expeditions. But the budget is quite tight for right now. Back to the mission at hand. Apart from an accidental disconnect of the CO2 scrubbers on board Lucy, causing a carbon dioxide alarm and a short-lived uh-oh moment down in ground control, all systems appear to be operating as intended. And one revolution after separating from Linus to set sail on its own, Gus and Scott perform the procedures necessary to ascend from the lunar surface, abort during powered descent, or, in this case, simply purposefully separate from the descent stage to perform a rendezvous with the ascent stage alone. Pressurizing fuel and ensuring ascent batteries are online, the abort stage button is depressed, and the two halves are now separated. The initial burn performed by the descent stage altered Lucy's orbital period relative to Linus by roughly 1 minute longer. A short burn from the ascent stage engine in the opposite direction will bring the two right around to where they came from, adjusting the relative orbital period to 30 seconds shorter than Linus's. In simpler terms, the two will meet with one another in precisely 2 revolutions. All the while, onboard radar as well as visual observation of sunlight glinting off of Jim's spacecraft will give Gus and Scott a very accurate depiction of their ride home, floating in the blackness above the Earth and inching closer second by second. Linus and Lucy reunite in Earth orbit just over 8 hours from liftoff, having traveled roughly 469 kilometers from each other at their furthest point. The initial approach is less than 10 meters per second, requiring only small pulses from reaction control thrusters to control the approach and following station keeping required. Waving at one another and jokingly complaining to flight control about dealing with all the traffic up here, all are in good spirits as the crew of 3 perform final approach, soft capture, docking, checkout, and evaluation. The 3 will spend the next 10 days in orbit of the Earth, giving the Trinity systems a full test, observing weather patterns and geography, star charts, and various other experiments, and no further issues are reported throughout their stay. Saying goodbye to Lucy as she is jettisoned, simply by extending Linus's docking probe and letting pressure escape to push the two away, the ascent and descent stages will remain in orbit of the Earth until their altitude decays enough to burn them up in the atmosphere, just along with the K-4B. Separation from the service module is nominal, and Trinity 1 now has one final item on their mission checklist, simply surviving the ordeal and coming back home. Entry interface happens just before sunrise on day 10. The 0.05 G light indicator illuminates, and the crew brace for re-entry. Meanwhile, just west of Hawaii, the United States Navy mounts their recovery effort, ready and able to fetch our brave Kerbonauts from the frigid Pacific Ocean in no time at all. May 10th, 1965. The all-rookie crew of Trinity 2, Commander Thomas Kerman, Command Module Pilot John Kerman, and Lunar Module Pilot Eugene Kerman, have had only 1 week's time to discuss with the crew of Trinity 1 about their next mission and about their experience on the previous mission. Alterations to checklists, briefing on system performance, and various pieces of advice are passed from 1 to 2. This new information will be carried along with all of the mission training by crew and faculty who are only partway through a very, very busy month in Brownsville. Early in the afternoon, the Cattern 5 reaches its terminal countdown, and all systems are go. No problems seemed to occur during launch other than a somewhat inefficient ascent trajectory. Upon reaching orbit, all systems are verified in a rapid fashion. Since no problems seem to arise, there is no need to remain in a parking orbit before burning for the moon. Trinity 2 completes its TLI maneuver merely 30 minutes from liftoff. Half an hour ago, the crew of 3 were sitting on the surface of the Earth, and now they're on their way to another world. Right around the 1-day mark of Trinity 2's mission, Flight Control pipes in with surprising but worrisome news. Soviet media has announced to the world they have successfully launched a mission to the moon, a crewed flight, and intelligence agrees. A once rather laid-back atmosphere is immediately thrown into distress. It is not known if the Soviets intend to land on the moon at this point, but should they, and should they succeed, well, that simply cannot happen. The Red Moon must not happen, lest the free world change forever. This news sparks both fear and possibility, both very persuasive forces. On one hand, we are unaware of the Soviet mission's intent. Recent launch failures have no doubt set their lunar program back, and there's nothing like a giant leap to set it back on its feet again, both to boost morale and to entirely negate the time lost recuperating and rebuilding. For them to land on the moon straight away would be daring and dangerous, but not out of the realm of possibility. On the other hand, Our mission plan today is the one and final full dress rehearsal of a lunar landing, performing everything necessary save for the actual landing itself. The Trinity 1 mission all over again, but with much higher stakes. This profile could very well be modified to include a landing, albeit just as daring and dangerous. Time is both an ally and an enemy in this regard. The Soviets are 1 day behind, leaving the United States with 1 day to attempt a landing in order to ensure that they are in fact first. However, the current lunar phase, or position of the sun, is drowning the entire near side of the moon in shadow, absolute darkness. Nominal landing sites are therein diminishing minute by minute, and would threaten the safety of already largely experimental and unknown aspects of lunar surface activity. The debate goes on, back and forth, as the crew of Trinity 2 reach lunar orbit and prepare the lunar excursion module for activity. At the end of the day, no matter what flight control decides, the two spacecraft are entirely controlled by the crew and by the crew alone, who so far have followed the original mission plan as instructed, a plan that might just be altered to allow for a landing, should that unlikely choice be made. The lunar module is nicknamed Snoopy by the crew, both to stick with the common Peanuts theme established by Trinity 1, and to pay homage to the safety mascot back in mission control. And so naturally, it follows that the command and service module be given the name Charlie Brown. Thomas and Eugene in the LEM pressurize the descent stage fuels and prepare to burn its engine. Back on Earth, the decision is made to follow the original flight plan, entailing a short burn of the descent stage engine to bring the LEM's paraloon to just above the surface, after which the ascent stage will take over to rendezvous with Charlie Brown once again. This burn initially starts up with a loud bang as the engine fails to fully ignite and shuts down, a transient failure. The master alarm is pushed, pressures and systems still appear go in the silent moments that follow, and so the engine is relit once again a handful of seconds later. This time, luckily, successful. Should there have been any inkling of an idea of landing on the surface during this mission, a faulty descent stage engine has just put a nail in that coffin. Trinity 2 will not land on the moon after all. Should the Soviets make an attempt of their own, they will be first. Soaring so close to the lunar surface is incredible, especially given the current phase of the moon. Sunlight allows the crew to fly close to and observe clearly the far side, a place littered with mountains, craters, and boulders, a desolate landscape of never-ending unexplored nooks and crannies that are never seen from the Earth's surface. To view from above, the surface features moving so rapidly below is absolutely breathtaking. It serves to forget all about the silly race to the moon. Tom and Eugene aren't here for the United States, not alone, because they carry all of everyone with them in their endless wonder. For a few moments, they could care less if the Soviets land in the next few days or not. But ever creeping in as the lunar module descends so effortlessly in its orbit is a feeling of gut instinct. The simple thought that this is our chance. We're so close to the moon, you could reach out and grab a fistful of dust. It's tempting. It's all-encompassing. The controls at the hands of two Kerbals standing in a shared silence. They could land, and they both know it. They've both trained for it. But that's not the mission. Snoopy makes its way with orbital calculations and rendezvous radar back to its mothership, Charlie Brown, where John has been hard at work photographing the lunar surface, a task that all three will now share as rendezvous is completed. Every 2 hours the spacecraft orbit, spending an hour in sunlight and an hour in shadow. During the daytime, making surface observations, able to communicate periodically by broadcasting through the Lorospe satellite, which has helped the Surveyor spacecrafts land on the far side not too long ago. During the night, communications with the Earth are fully restored, and the crew are able to rant and rave of their findings, hour after hour, day after day. All in all, the three will remain in lunar orbit for a week's time, hearing nothing of Soviet activity all the while. We can only assume the flight was the same as ours, an orbital test. Just to be safe, the crew of Charlie Brown make time to broadcast Western music across all known Soviet frequencies that their spacecraft might just be using, not truly knowing of its effectiveness, but we'll be sure to display our confidence nonetheless. On May 19th, Snoopy is jettisoned for the final time, and Trinity 2 burns like hell for home, making note of the fuel margins available afterwards to gauge just how much fuel we have for necessary maneuvers that we'll need to pick up the landing crew in the case of inclination changes or emergencies. The vehicle has served the crew well, and everyone involved in the mission feels confident that we are ready. No more dress rehearsals, no more tests. Very soon the Trinity 3 mission will be ready, and the moon conquered. Trinity 2 arrives back home to the Hawaiian recovery fleet stationed in the southern Pacific Ocean, ready to light its flares and launch its recovery efforts in the dead of night. The crew have famously mastered re-entry simulations in minimizing heat loads and g-forces coming back from cislunar velocities, and it definitely has shown here today. The maximum g-forces exerted on the spacecraft never exceeded 5.1 Gs, and it is a smooth ride all the way down. From drogue to main chute to propellant dumping and splashdown readiness, the mission finally comes to an end. Recovery helicopters are present shortly after splashing down, illuminating the otherwise dark ocean with spotlights and revealing the return of the Trinity 2 crew. Mission success. All landing prerequisites are now complete. We are go for landing, which we will be performing live, by the way. That's right, both Beardy and I will be live streaming our lunar landings without revealing their launch dates in the process, after which we will spend some time creating cinematic lunar landing videos for us all to enjoy. Lately, I've been working overtime and, as always, not getting enough sleep to truly keep my sanity while making these videos, so I'm not certain what date or time quite yet. But I will be sure to schedule the stream at least a day ahead of time. And as always, to see what Beardy has been up to and to see if Carnasa has landed crew on Mars just yet, their channels are in the description below, and their videos should be in the playlist linked at the end of this screen. A special thank you to Caden Seward as, again, the first director on the N9 Patreon. I really appreciate you, friend. And to the rest, thank you all so much for watching. And peace out.